matzah. We'll get back to chametz and matzah, but for today, we're going to learn the halachas of what qualifies as maror. So we're at the top of Lamates Amid Aleph 39a, the Mishnah ve'elu yeraka shadam yetzabehem yidei chavasei bePesach. These are vegetables or greens that a person can fulfill their obligation of maror on Pesach, as the Torah says, al matzah semarorim yachlu. You'll eat the korban Pesach combined or upon matzah and maror. So there's an obligation to eat maror. And what was the question? Oh, okay. And the obligation to eat maror is an obligation where you have to eat, like in all things, a kazayis, an olive size. So what fulfills this obligation? Bechazeres, as the Gemara is going to tell us, that this is lettuce. And there are various types of lettuce, and the Gemara is going to tell us that all count. The tamcha, tamcha is actually the next in line in the order, because the order is from most, the best option down to the least, the least, least option, the one that's not for not optimal. So the second one is Olshin, which is fourth in our list, and there's a textual mistake in all other prints. It's the other way. So Bechazeres in lettuce, Olshin, which the Gemara is going to tell us is endives or chicory, Betamcha in horseradish root, Becharchavina in Charchavina, and Beolshin, and which we said was endives. Maror, also the Gemara is going to tell us what that is. So Yetzim Behen, and the Mishnah now says that you fulfill the obligation with these, regardless bein lachin bein yaveshin, regardless of whether they are still fresh or they're dried out. And the Gemara is going to tell us that that's not exactly in every case. Avaloi kavushin, but you cannot fulfill the obligation if they are marinated. And this is something important to know. Often when people buy the horseradish for Pesach, it is already in a brine or a vinegar, and the Mishnah clearly says you do not fulfill the obligation with that. And also not if they are cooked and into a mush or disintegrated. Not regular cooked. And they combine to a kazayas. So the obligation of having a kazayas, an olive size, you don't have to have an olive size just of lettuce. You can have an olive size of lettuce and a horseradish, or endives and lettuce, etc. It can combine to the kazayas. And you can fulfill the obligation not only in the leaves, but also in the stem. Ubidamai, and when you purchase from the field, we saw earlier this concept of demai is when you purchase something from the marketplace and you're not sure that it was tithed, meiser, rishon and sheni would take it from there, and so you're obligated to take it yourself, the obligation from the chachamim, and that obligation is rabbinic, and so there are times that you're allowed to eat it, as we saw earlier when somebody is by matzah. We saw if somebody is a poor person or a guest, soldiers, etc., and there's an ability for every person really to be in the state by relinquishing all their assets, and so demai, you can also fulfill the obligation of maror with that. And in the first tithe, that the Levi gets, if you have taken his 10% and give it to the Kohen, so it's edible. So he's allowed to do ma'aser sheni ve'hektish sheniftu, and the second tithe or hektish that had been redeemed, and these are similar to what we saw earlier in matzah. So the Gemara explains chazeres chasa. Chazeres in the Mishnah is lettuce. Olshin hindavi, endives or chicory. Tamcha, Amar Rabba Babachana, Tamchasa, which is horseradish. Tamchasa Shema. Chachavina, Amar Reb Shimon Lakish, Atzvasa de Dikla. It's something that grows around or right at the foot of palm trees. That is a bitter herb. Uvamarar, and in the general term marar, marisa. So Rashi learns that it's a particular a particular type of greens. Rashi gives us a word in I guess Old French. I'm not sure what it is. I don't know if any of your translations say what it is, but Rashi gives a particular thing. And so it seems in the Mishnah that there are 5 particular greens that you can fulfill the obligation with and nothing else. However, some interpret the last word, uvamarar, to be a general term, not a specific item like Rashi translates, but rather a particular item, a general term, or any other bitter herb. And the Ramah says in Halacha, even though that's not the optimum way, the optimum is what's listed in the Mishnah. If one cannot find any of them, then they may fulfill the obligation with any bitter herb. So indeed, it seems like the halacha is to interpret this word uvamarar as a general term. Tani bar kapara. Bar kapara taught in Braisa Eli Rakash Adam Yoytze Beheng Chavasa BePesach. These are the vegetables a person can fulfill his obligation of marar on Pesach. Ba'olshin, with endives or chicory, or with tamchasa, with horseradish, or bechar chalin, or bechar chavinin, or bechazrin. Rabbi Yehuda Eimer, af olshe sada, also endives of the field, olshe gina, and endives of a garden, bechazeres, and lettuce. So Gemara says, "Ol shegina v'chazeres satani laresha." Bar kapara already said. What did Rabbi Yehuda add? Garden endives and lettuce. That's already been taught at the first in the first list. Hachikama afal shesadika shegina v'chazeres. That what he meant to say is that field endives are the same as garden endives and lettuce, which are already listed. Rabbi Meir af asves v'tura umar Yeruah. Rabbi Meir says also these 4. Amar le Rabbi Yesi. Rabbi Yesi says, well, actually, asves v'tura echadu. Asves v'tura are the same, and mar zeu Yeruah, and also mar is Yeruah. Don't know what these are, but it's a list of vegetables that are bitter herbs. All this really seems to support Rashi's version that there's a specific list of vegetables that are included, and it's not just a general term for bitter herbs.
Can I ask a question, please?
Go ahead.
So I once remember hearing a whole discussion, maybe even from you or with you, but about moror and making the bracha of Adama on the karpas to be moitzi the moror, because the discussion was that moror is not really lechila really, but the derech achila of moror is on Pesach dafka. That it's not like something you eat year round. It's not something that you want to eat. It's just we eat it on Pesach.
I think the conversation is a little different. It's a question of if it's not the normal time and way of eating something as a part of a meal, then it wouldn't be included in the bracha. But normally we say if you wash and eat bread, you say hamotzi, that's the bracha for all the foods in the meal, because everything else is sort of coming secondarily as a part of the bread meal. But if you're eating something that's not a part of the bread meal, so then you would make a bracha, such as Rosh Hashanah night when we eat apples dipped in honey. That's not a part of a meal, even though we eat it in the Rosh Hashanah meal because of Rosh Hashanah. So we say Borei Pri Eitz on that. So too, in them eating the maror alone, it's not really a part of the meal. It's an atypical food that's eaten alone and not a meal food, and therefore it should require a bracha of its own. And for that, the bracha on karpas is meant to cover that. When you say the Borei Pri Adama on karpas with intent to cover the mar, I think that's what you're referring to. But the idea that it would not require any bracha because it's not edible, I don't know.
That was the discussion I heard, that it wasn't really Roy Lechila. Why does it need a bracha at all? Needs a bracha because the derech achila of moror is on Leil Pesach Davka.
Okay.
But so I'm just wondering that, I mean, the whole, if it's not Roy Lechila, what do we care about whether it's, by matzah, okay, that's food. Everybody agrees that matzah is food. I mean, almost everybody. But I mean, matzah is food. So we have the question of meiser.
I don't know. I question that statement that it's not food. I mean, I eat lettuce all the time.
Yeah.
And I've not all the time, but it'll make it. It's not edible. I don't know. It seems we have bitter herbs that we eat on a regular basis. It's
but
hard
somebody things that they're mentioning, which are a little bit off the wall, that nobody really knows what they are, that they're not like normal foods. I mean, you wouldn't have to take Meiser Sheni or they wouldn't have to take Meiser or Truma of
we'll see that later, because that really is another question of whether garden vegetables or garden herbs require Meiser. And we'll see that obviously in our mission, we're talking about that you took tithes from them.
Right.
That was going to be the Rabbanan. But that's a different conversation. You brought in a conversation of bracha and whether it's a typical edible food, and I don't think that, I don't think that's true for this list. It may be horseradish root is not something you typically eat alone, and that wouldn't require a bracha, perhaps. But the endives and lettuce, I'm not sure why that wouldn't require.
They were talking about the horseradish, maybe.
Sorry?
Maybe they were talking about the horseradish.
Yeah, okay. Well, on the second wide line, Tanad Rabbi Shmuel. So the Academy of Rabbi Shmuel was taught, these are a list of vegetables that would count for a mar, that a person could fulfill his obligation on Pesach. Bechazeres, with lettuce, ba'olshin, with endives, chicory, batamka, and with horseradish root, b'charvinin, b'charginin, or b'hardufnin. Adds another few into the list. Rashi suggests what hardufnin is.
What hardufnim is?
Sorry?
What does Rashi say hardufnim is?
Alasin. I have no idea what it is.
Well, oleander, in modern Hebrew, harduf is oleander. I'm just wondering. Oleander is very, very bitter, but it's also lethal. It's toxic and can kill you.
All right. In the Hebrew translation I have here, they say it's la'ana, but I don't know what la'ana is.
Some bitter thing, but
it sounds like a bitter thing, but I don't know what it is. So my list of ancient vegetables is growing without knowing what they are. So Rabbi Yehuda says, Af chazeres yulin v'chazeres galin. Also lettuce of yulin and lettuce of galin. So I don't know if these are names based on their shape, and galin means like it's wavy or it's from a place. So kiyetzaben, these are also, but these are types of lettuce, and you will fulfill the obligation with those as well. Rabbi Elayam and Meshum Rabbi Lazar, Af Arkavlin. Rabbi Eli said in the name of Rabbi Eliezer also some sort of vine type of structure that grows at the foot of the palm tree. But I checked with all of the students of Rabbi Eliezer to seek someone who also remembers the same teaching that he said that it was that you can fulfill the obligation with our covenant. But I couldn't find anybody that remembered that and agreed with me. But when I came before Rabbi Yaakov, he admitted to my teaching. In the name of our teacher, Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol sheyesh lo yisraf. Rabbi Yehuda says, as long as it has a sap, that when you break the root, some white, milky, liquidy or sappy thing would come out. As long as it's either its face or edges are pale. And others say that actually all bitter herbs will have this white milky sappy thing. It's not really sap, because sap is typically stickier, maybe more viscous. But with when you break the center of lettuce, you'll get a little bit of a droplet of white milky juices, if you would, coming out. So he says all bitter herbs have that, and panamachsifin, and also have a paleness to its front, sides, whatever you want to call it. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, midivri kula nilmad. From all of them we learn yarek mar yesh leisraf panamachsifin. From all of this we learn that the bitter herbs have these two attributes. They have this milky sraf, juice coming out, and its face is white, is pale. That is the halacha, that all these bitter herbs have that. Ravina found the Ravacha, the son of Rava, that was looking for bitter herbs, and a specific one called marisa, which Rashi again interprets like he interpreted in the Mishnah Maror, pufuritz. I don't know what this old French word is. So he was looking for this. Amar lei. So Ravina said to him, "My daitach, the marir and fei. Why are you looking for that? Because it's the most bitter of the list. V'chazeres tanan. But the Mishnah, in the order of preference, listed them in the order of preference, and the order of preference, chazeres, lettuce is the first. Tana devei Rabbi Shmuel, and the Academy of Shmuel taught chazeres as well. But Amar Rabbi Shaya mitzvah b'chazeres. Rabbi Shaya said that the chazeres is the mitzvah, meaning it's the best one. Amar Rava my chazeres, and Rava says, what is chazeres? Chasa. It's called chasa. And my chasa, and why do we call it chasa? In other words, what does it hint to us? This word, the chas rachmana lavan, that it reminds us that Hashem had pity and compassion and took care of us. And why are Egyptians like maror? Just as maror at the center point it's hard, but its edges are soft. So it starts off soft and gets into a hard center. So too the Egyptians started off soft and nice with the Jews, and then eventually enslaved them. First they offered them money for the work, and then said, you did a good job, but tomorrow you're going to continue the same without payment. Amalei, he said, wow, thank you for telling me that. Hadribi, I retract. I'm not going to look for the mar, rather I'm going to look for lettuce or the ones earlier in the list, because those are the preference. Amalei Rav Rechumi la'Abaye. Rav Rechumi said to Abaye, Mimayda haimara min yereku. How do you know that? How do you even know that when the Torah says al matzah and marorim yachlu, you eat it with matzah and maror? How do you know maror is a bitter herb? Hey marisa the chufya. Maybe it's the gall of a fish. I don't know. That's bitter too. Do me the matzah. No, it has to be like matzah. The Torah says matzah and maror. They both grow from the ground. Matzah gedula karka, maror gedula karka. They both grow from the ground. It says okay. Ve'ema hirduf. Maybe it's hirduf. which is a branch, a piece of wood that's bitter. Dumi the matzah. So too it has to be like matzah. My matzah means zaroim. Af mora means zaroim. Not something that's seeds, a plant, not a tree. So too, just as matzah, so too mora. The ema harzifu, and maybe it's harzifu, which is a type of seed, but it is very bitter, and it's actually, Rashi says, it's poisonous to animals. No, it has to be something that's actually food, and that, and the definition of that, or the barometer of that, the way to check that is, can you buy it with Meiser Sheni money? As we talked about, all Meiser Sheni that people had outside in their fields or their homes, they wouldn't bring it each time up to Yerushalayim. The second tithe has to be eaten in Yerushalayim, and they wouldn't do that. What they would do is they would transfer it onto a coin and bring the coin to Yerushalayim and use it to buy food, and that got the status of Meiser Sheni. But it would have to be something that's edible, like meat and wine, and so this harzifa seed is not included. Says maybe it's just one. Why do you have a whole list? Because it says plural. Merorim. Maybe it's two. Tell me the matzah. No, it's again compared to matzah. It says matzah and moror in one breath. Ma matzah meaning harbe. Just as matzah, it could be from wheat, barley, oats, spelt, and rye. Chitasari, as the list I had before. Af moror meaning harbe. So too for moror, we have a list over here as well that it could be lettuce and endives, horseradish, etc. This list of vegetables that a person can fulfill his obligation on Pesach, they can all be planted in one patch. Now we learned this in the Gemara in Shabbos, and in the idea that in Shabbos Erevin, the idea that you can't plant different vegetables in the same patch if they are going to get nourished from each other, and there's no separation above the ground from them. So the Gemara is going to say, Lamemer the lesbu mashum kalayim. Are you trying to tell me that there's no mixed seeds with all these? They're all considered one? Masiv Rava. So Rava challenged it. The Mishnah in Kilayim says chazeres v'chazeres galin, that if you have lettuce and this lettuce galin, or olshem sadeh, endives and field endives, krishin v'krishay sadeh, cress and field cress, kusbar v'kusbar sadeh, kusbara and the field kusbar, charda v'chalder mitzvah, Egyptian mustard with mustard, delasa mitzvah v'harmutza, Egyptian gourd and gourd, and pumpkin. Einem kalayim zebazeh. Those are not mixed seed with each other because they're essentially the same. But it's only because of they're listed together. Chazeres v'chazeres galanin, chazeres v'olshen loy. It's only because lettuce and this galan lettuce, those are going to be one type. But if you couldn't do lettuce and endives, and if you can tell me, no, it means that you can put them all together. That's not true. But if you look at the text, it's clear that each one's a set, a pair. The lettuce with the lettuce that has a hyphenated name, and the endives and the endives of the field, and the cress of the field, etc. So you see clearly that their sets are not kilayim mixed seeds, but it would be a prohibition of planting the mixed seeds if you mix them together. So Gemara says you're right. What mine is Roy Rav. This Rav said that you can put them in one patch. Is Roy Kil Chasan. You can do them like the halacha is to do it properly, which the Gemara had told us over there in that you would put within one patch. You can put a 6 in a 6 tefachim patch, so about an amma, let's say 1.5 feet. You can actually put 5 seeds in, one on the north edge, one on the east edge, one on the southern edge, one on the western edge, and one in the center. And then you would have 3 tefachim, enough distance from each one. And so they're going to count as you can plant them in one patch. And that's what he meant, that the 5 of them can be planted if you do so halachically the way it's supposed to be. Kel chasan. Tanina. So he says, so then that we already learned. Why does Rav have to tell us, oh, you can plant them as the halacha is? Obviously, you can plant them as the halacha is. You can plant anything that way. Kel chasan, Tanina. When you turn the page to Lamates Hamad Beis, Aruga she shisha al shisha. If you have a patch that's 6 tefachim by 6 tefachim, then you can plant 5 seeds in there. Arba al arba ruchas haruga. 4 on the 4 sides of the patch. So 1 in the middle. And we saw this earlier when we were learning this Gemara in Shabbos. The Gemara explained the different patterns of how to make this work. So what do you mean that you can do this? Obviously, you can do this. This is something that we were allowed, that anything you're allowed to do, any vegetables you're allowed to do so. So Gemara says, no, I would have thought Mao de Tema Hani Mili Bizrayim. Maybe that's only in seeds. Aval Yurukas and vegetables like. Maybe you cannot put them in the same patch because they grow taller and thicker. Kamash Malan. That's why it needs to tell us. Rav told us that this too you're allowed to do 5 in a 6 by 6 tefachim patch. Lamemer de Yurukas alimim is right. So you're telling me that vegetables are stronger and they nourish more from each other, and I would have thought that they're going to be a bigger problem. Vatanan, but the Mishnah seems to say it differently. Kol mine zeroim ein zerim ba'aruga achas. All types of seeds may not be planted in one patch. Kol mine yerakis zerim ba'aruga achas. But all types of vegetables may be planted in a single patch. So you see that vegetables are going to take less nourishment from each other on the ground. Gemara says, now the point is that we would have thought that these types of bitter herbs are like the seeds, rather than vegetables. Kamash Malan, that's why it tells us that you can plant them together. So you would have thought they're seeds. We learned Yurukas. The Mishnah says these are vegetables. They're not seeds. They're vegetables that you fulfill the obligation of Mara with. And in the Bakapara's Brisa also said vegetables. And he also called them vegetables. No, well, there's a reason because of the lettuce. Since the stem hardens. So it's not because I thought that they were called seeds. The Gemara now changes the answer. Maybe it's because they are the stem of the lettuce becomes hardened and becomes more like a reed and becomes more tree-like. So it needs more space. So the Gemara says, and didn't we see similarly that a stalk of Brussels sprouts that had hardened, you have to give it more space in a vegetable patch because even up to base rova, on account of that, it becomes hardened, and so it gets it needs more space. So too the lettuce would have to have more space because the stem has hardened. Al Makiva the Sefer Lahaksha. So we see since it had in the end the center, the core, the stem hardens. Yavina le Ravchatve, just like the Brussels sprout stalk. So to the lettuce stem would need more space. So maybe it needs more. Kamash Malan, that's why Rabbi to tell us that it's like regular vegetables and it doesn't need more space. So Gemara says we're going to go back to the Mishnah now, and the Mishnah that said that you can fulfill the obligation with these vegetables regardless of whether they are fresh or they are dried out.
Rabbi, I'm sorry, page position, please.
Lamed Tes Summit Base 39b. We are at the 2 dots, the last 6-7 lines of the narrow lines.
Thank you.
So Yotze Behen Bein Lachem Bein Yaveshin. So it said in the Mishnah that you can fulfill your obligation for Maror with these vegetables, this list, regardless of whether they are fresh, lachin, or wet, or yaveshin, they're dry, meaning they have dried out. Amar Rav Chisda, to which Rav Chisda said, Leshanu ela bekelach. This is true only in regards to the stem, which doesn't dry out and shrivel and disintegrate and lose its flavor. Ava ba'alin, but in the leaves itself, lachin in yaveshin, only if they're wet and fresh, not if they are dried out. So dried out lettuce won't do. Well, but the Mishnah seems to say a different statement, a separate statement about the kelach, about the stem. Mechlal, the reisha alin, which seems to be the beginning, where it says that you can fulfill your obligation regardless of whether they're fresh or not, fresh or dried out, on the leaves. And Gemara says no. Prusha kama farish. It's actually explaining that statement. That you can fulfill your obligation with these, whether they're dry or wet, if you're talking about the stem, which doesn't lose its flavor, it doesn't lose its bitter, its construct when it dries out. So we challenge this statement of Rav Chisda. You can fulfill your obligation with them and with the kelach, with their stem. Bein lachem innovation, the Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says whether they're dried out or fresh. The Chachamim say lachem yetzaben, yeveshin yetzaben. No, you can only fulfill it with fresh and not if they're dried out. The Shavin, both the Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim agree yetzaben kemushin, that they have somewhat shriveled. Avolei kavushim, and not if they had been marinated. V'lo shlukin, and not if they're cooked. V'lo mavushalin, and not if they have been just irregular cooked, not fully cooked. So Kollel shadavar. This is the end of the statement. The basis is this. This is the rule. Kol sheyesh b'tam mara yotzim, as long as it still has a bitter taste, it's going to be mara. You cannot fulfill the obligation. In any case, if you look at the first statement of this brisa, it says you can fulfill your obligation with the with leaves or with the stem, whether it's dry or wet. Seemingly, on both, it's going on both. To which the Gemara says no. The way to read it is like this: you can fulfill your obligation with the leaves or with the stem, regardless whether it's wet or dry. So we have a brisa. The Chachamim taught, and we're going to learn from this halacha that it cannot be shriveled, and yet we saw before that it is you could fulfill shriveled. That you can, if they are shriveled, then it's not going to be something, a vegetable that you can fulfill your obligation with, and some say you can't. So now we have a question about the second tithe in Yerushalayim, which we had a machlekes by matzah. Rabbi Yisrael Galili said you cannot fulfill the obligation with matzah of Meiser Sheni, of the second tithe that you have to eat in Yerushalayim, on account of that Meiser Sheni, you have to make a statement about and say Lo echalti mamena ba'oni. I did not eat from it in mourning, in a state of mourning. And this matzah is called lechem oni. It's called a affliction bread, a bread of mourning. So Rabbi Yisrael says you may not fulfill the obligation of matzah with Meiser Sheni. And Rabbi Kiva disagreed. What about maror of this second tithe? So now the Gemara it's important to know that the Gemara is going to tell us now, even though we take Meiser Sheni from these vegetables, that's not a Torah obligation. The Torah obligation for taking maror of taking the second tithe, Meiser Sheni, taking Meiser, tithing your vegetables, is actually a rabbinic obligation, because from a Torah obligation, there is no such obligation. So the Meiser Sheni that you have to eat in Yerushalayim of these vegetables is a rabbinic obligation. Now, Rashi over here, for some reason, brings the other teaching of why you're not allowed to, you wouldn't be allowed to fulfill the obligation of matzah with Meiser Sheni. Even though Rabbi Kiva disagreed with this, Rashi brings the idea that you need moshavas. It needs to be something that you eat anywhere, and Meiser Sheni is something you can't eat anywhere. And the question is, if this is rabbinic in nature, can you eat it anywhere? Or if it's rabbinic in nature, are you allowed to eat it even in oni, even in a state of mourning? So Gemara says, now, according to Rabbi Kiva, it's not a question. For sure, you're allowed to fulfill the obligation you can fulfill your Torah obligation of matzah with a Meiser Sheni. So for sure, you can fulfill your Torah obligation of maror with a rabbinic Meiser Sheni, which is vegetables. Vegetables are only rabbinic, as we said. There's no obligation from the Torah to tithe your vegetables and eat it in Yerushalayim. That's a rabbinic obligation. So for sure, if matzah, which is a Torah obligation of tithing, you can fulfill the obligation, your matzah, so for sure more. However, according to Rabbi Yisrael, who says that matzah cannot be eaten, you cannot fulfill the obligation of matzah with Meiser Sheni matzah. The matzah d'oraisa d'lo nafik. That's because it's a Torah obligation to not eat it in the morning, or it's a Torah obligation to only eat it in Yerushalayim. Aval maror d'Rabbanan, but maror, which is rabbinic in nature, so therefore perhaps this prohibition of eating it in morning or eating it only in Yerushalayim does not apply, and therefore you can fulfill your obligation. Or no, when the Rabbanan enacted it, they implied the same structure. And the structure of Meiser Sheni that they incorporated or they instituted for vegetables also has these limitations. You can't eat it in the morning, and you have to eat it in Yerushalayim. So let me just finish. So perhaps since you have these limitations, even though they're rabbinic, but they are the limitations that therefore you cannot fulfill the obligation of maror with this. Now, it's logical to say that matzah and maror have the same limitations. And according to Rabbi Kiva, you can fulfill your obligation of matzah and maror of Meiser Sheni. And according to Rabbi Yisrael, both maror and matzah cannot be fulfilled with Meiser Sheni in the second time. Yes, Michael.
So on matzahs morim yochlu. So that's Klaved the Korban Pesach. You're not going to eat it anywhere but Yerushalayim. So why would there be an issue of Meiser Sheni that it's b'chol mosh v'seichem, but by there you can't. It's an impossibility. I mean, it's matzos morim yochlu is always going to be in Yerushalayim.
If you brought a Korban Pesach, but if you didn't, you're still obligated in matzah.
Well, but that's the Korban Pesach.
But you're obligated if you didn't either. We saw Ben Beseira was in the Tzivin. He was obligated in matzah maror. Right? The
So
Torah
it
says,
can't
wherever you are, you're going to have to eat matzah.
why wouldn't there be hekesh with any place that you could eat the korban?
That's why the Torah specifically says it has to be matzah you can eat anywhere. Everywhere, wherever you are, you have to eat matzah. Even in...
So even if you're not eating the korban, you have to eat matzah and more.
Correct. Matzah b'chol mashasechem derech matzahs. The next Mishnah, we just have a moment to start the Mishnah. The next Mishnah is going to talk about soaking grains or husks or other parts of the grain for other uses. You're not making a dough, but you're making other use. So ein sharin es amursan l'matar. You can't soak the husks or the bran for to turn it into animal feed for chickens. Avocholtin. Because if you soak it, it's going to turn into chametz. However, you can pour boiling water on it, which will instantly soften it, and then you give it to the animal to eat right away. It won't have a chance to turn into chametz. Similarly, that you would use bran as a type of soap. And it says women should not do this. It seems like only women used soap back then. So women shouldn't take this morsin and soak it and then bring it to the bathhouse, because in that time it'll turn into chametz. But she can take the dry bran and use it and rub it on her and use it as soap. Yavesh, when it's dry, even though that it'll turn wet from the bath water and then go to waste. Also, don't chew wheat berries and in order to make a mush and then put it onto a wound, because that would turn into chametz. It seems like one of the ways of making triple antibiotic ointment was taking wheat berries and chewing on them, and that was a way to heal your wound.